So you're sitting in a meeting.
Right.
Or maybe you're at a dinner with a group of friends, colleagues, and someone across the table asks a question.
Okay.
And you know the exact answer in English.
Of course you do.
Like, the sentence is perfectly formed in your head. It's sitting right there on your tongue. But you sit there and you remain entirely silent.
Yeah. It's the worst.
Why do we do this to ourselves? I mean, welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Thanks for having me.
We always like to joke that learning a language is like 50% studying vocabulary and 50% amateur psychology.
Oh, at least 50%.
Yeah.
And today we are definitely leaning into the psychology side of things.
It is. It's so true. I mean, I was laughing before we started recording because just reading the source material for today's topic, it had me second-guessing my own sentences.
Yeah, I was wondering if I sound natural enough, It's a completely universal feeling.
Right.
But I'm really looking forward to this discussion because it addresses this massive, completely unspoken roadblock for so many learners.
Right. We are going straight into the trenches of daily English conversation today.
Yeah, we are.
Our mission is very specific. We are looking at that crucial, really frustrating gap between understanding English. So, let's say you're at a solid B1 level,
Right. You get the jokes.
Exactly. You get the jokes, you follow the meetings just fine. But the gap between that and actually using it naturally and confidently in daily life to reach that B2 fluency.
That's the hard part.
We want to figure out how to stop getting trapped in our own heads, basically.
The most fascinating part of the research we're diving into today is that the main barrier for this specific group of learners isn't a lack of vocabulary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it isn't a failure to grasp grammar rules either. The people we are talking about today actually possess the English they need. Like, they have the tools to communicate effectively.
So what's the problem then?
The barrier is almost entirely about what happens in the 3 or 4 seconds before they open their mouths.
Oh, man. Yes. And that brings us right back to that painfully relatable scenario we opened with.
The silent meeting.
The sources call it the perfect unspoken sentence.
Right.
I've experienced this myself when traveling. Like, you're in that group, you're following the conversation perfectly.
You're nodding along.
Yeah, you're nodding, you're smiling. Then the opening arrives, a question is asked, and miraculously, you know the exact answer.
It feels great for a second.
It does. For about 3 seconds, you feel incredibly triumphant. You have the sentence ready to go, but you don't say it.
You don't say it because your internal editor suddenly wakes up and shouts, wait, we could make this better.
Oh, the editor.
Yeah, we call this the polishing trap.
Yeah.
So first you decide the beginning of your sentence isn't quite professional enough.
Right. You want to sound smart.
Exactly. So you swap out a few words. Then you start questioning your verb choice. Like, wait, is it past perfect or just past simple?
Oh, the grammar panic.
Yeah. And meanwhile, as you are doing this extensive mental remodeling, the rest of the group is just carrying on with the conversation.
Because they aren't pausing the meeting so you can finish your internal editing process.
No, they're not.
The world keeps turning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the harsh reality. And just as you start worrying about the pronunciation of one specific word in your now heavily edited sentence, disaster strikes.
Someone else speaks.
Someone else in the group speaks up. And they say almost the exact same thing you wanted to say.
Oh, that is a terrible feeling. You just have to sit there as the rest of the room nods and says, yeah, good point.
Good point, Gary.
Yeah, good point, Gary. And you nod along very professionally, but inside you are just screaming, that was my point.
You had it first.
Right. You didn't stay quiet because you had nothing to say. You stayed quiet because you were trying to make what you wanted to say absolutely perfect.
And here's the cruelest irony of the entire language learning process. Your absolute best, most fluent, grammar-perfect English usually arrives about 20 minutes after the conversation is over.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It happens when you are walking home alone, or you're standing in the shower.
The shower argument.
Right. Suddenly, you are the most eloquent English speaker on the planet.
Right.
You're delivering the perfect comeback to a room full of nobody.
Delivering a speech to an empty room. You know, this whole dynamic, it reminds me of being a ghost at a dinner party.
Oh, a ghost. I like that.
Think about it. You are in the room, you hear the clinking glasses, you understand all the jokes being told, you have these incredibly witty opinions to add to the discussion.
But you're invisible.
Right, because you are waiting to materialize perfectly. You're making sure your ghostly form is 100% visible and flawless before you reveal yourself.
And so nobody can actually see you?
Nobody can hear you. You are haunting the conversation instead of participating in it.
That analogy captures the isolation perfectly. I mean, you're effectively invisible, not because you lack the ability to be seen, but because of your own impossibly high standards for appearing.
So let's look at the mechanics of this. I want to push into the actual science of what's happening in our brains.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because if we know the words, like if the ghost actually has a voice, why do we freeze? Why does the mind just pull the emergency brake the moment it's our turn to speak?
So to understand the freeze, we need to look at cognitive load theory, and specifically how human working memory operates.
Okay.
When you are just listening to English, your brain feels quite comfortable. You feel confident because your working memory only has one primary task.
Yeah.
Decoding the incoming information. You are just receiving data.
Right. The data is just flowing in.
Right.
It's passive, relatively speaking.
Exactly. But the absolute second it becomes your turn to speak, the demands on your brain multiply exponentially.
Oh, yeah.
Human working memory is very limited. We can only hold about 4 chunks of new information in our active mind at any given moment.
4 chunks? That's not a lot.
It's really not. You can think of it like the RAM in a computer.
Okay.
When you speak a second language, you aren't just opening one program. First, you open the core meaning program.
Like what I actually want to say.
Right. Then you open the grammar checking program to make sure your tenses are right.
Oh, boy.
Then the vocabulary program starts running a search for a more sophisticated word, because you don't want to sound basic.
Yeah, you want to sound B2.
Exactly. And then the pronunciation program starts taking up memory.
So you've got all these heavy background applications running at the exact same time on a computer that only has a limited amount of RAM.
Precisely. And then the system crasher arrives.
Which is what?
Fear. The emotional response of fear or anxiety takes up a massive amount of cognitive bandwidth. When that fear program opens, it just hogs whatever memory is left.
So the computer just freezes.
Your CPU hits 100% usage, and the system literally crashes. Your mind goes completely blank. Or rather, as the cognitive research points out, it didn't go blank at all. It got completely overloaded.
Right. It's not a void. It's a catastrophic traffic jam in the brain.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. So knowing that this system overload is a very real biological reality, how do learners usually try to solve it?
Well, they try to hack the system.
Because people are clever, right? They try to find a way to avoid the crash.
Yeah, they try to bypass the live processing entirely. And the most common coping mechanism for this is what we can call the call center strategy.
The call center strategy. Okay. I am highly intrigued. Tell me more.
So it's when a learner attempts to heavily rehearse entire branching conversations in their head long before they actually happen.
Oh, like writing a script.
Exactly. They try to anticipate every possible direction the chat could go. They sit there thinking, okay, if the client says X, I will answer Y.
Right.
But if they ask me about Z, I'll use this specific grammar structure I learned last week.
So they're building a flowchart.
Yes. They are effectively running a small, stressed out international call center in their brain, scripting out all these conversational flowcharts so they don't have to process anything live.
I will admit, I have definitely done this.
Oh, we all have.
Preparing for a phone call in another language, just mapping out a flowchart of human interaction on a notepad.
Yeah.
But let me challenge this a bit. Isn't preparation generally a good thing? I mean, as B1 learners trying to sound more professional, if we don't prepare our sentences in advance, won't everything just come out as a total mess? Aren't we supposed to plan what we say?
That is a very natural assumption. And preparation is helpful for static presentations, or, if you're giving a speech.
Yeah.
But here is why the call center strategy spectacularly fails in dynamic daily life conversations.
Why?
Real people are incredibly chaotic and inconsiderate of your plans.
Chaotic how? Because they don't follow the script.
They absolutely refuse to follow your script. You can have this beautifully crafted branch of conversation completely ready to go. And the other person will ask one completely normal, simple follow-up question that you didn't anticipate.
Like what?
They might just say, "Oh, really? Why is that?"
The ultimate system crasher. Why is that?
Those 3 words can destroy your entire rehearsed operation.
Just wipe it out completely.
Because when you are running a script in your head, you are actually actively listening to the other person.
You're just waiting to talk.
Right, you're just waiting for your cue to speak. And when the cue never comes and the script breaks, the panic program opens up again.
Hogging all the RAM.
It hogs all the RAM, and all that beautiful preparation just vanishes. It reduces you to a panicked, awkward answer.
You end up just saying, because.
Yes, thank you. A highly persuasive three-word disaster.
Oh, it's so painful.
And it leaves you feeling far worse than if you had just tried to speak spontaneously in the first place.
This brings us to a really deep underlying issue. We mentioned the panic program hogging the RAM.
Yeah.
If this whole flowchart call center approach is just a defense mechanism to avoid processing live, what are we actually defending against?
That's the real question.
Why are we so terrified of having a messy, unscripted conversation?
The root cause, undeniably, is the fear of looking foolish.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a threat to our identity. Think about it. When you make a mistake while you are alone in your room doing a grammar worksheet, it's completely fine.
Nobody cares.
Right. But making a mistake in front of another human being, especially a fluent, confident speaker, it suddenly feels enormous.
It really does.
It feels like a reflection of your fundamental intelligence.
Which is wild when you step back and look at it objectively. You're speaking a completely different language.
Exactly.
But inside your head, you're desperately thinking, I promise I have a personality in my native language.
I'm actually funny.
Right. I am a smart, funny, competent adult. Just wait until I find the right verb. You want your English to represent you properly. You want every sentence to sound as intelligent and nuanced as the thought in your head.
Which is impossible all the time.
It is a massive amount of pressure to put on yourself in a live setting. And it forces learners to become hyper-focused on tiny, insignificant errors that don't actually impact the meaning.
Oh yeah, the tiny details.
I've worked with learners who will ruin a perfectly good evening by spending 3 hours agonizing over whether they should have said in the weekend or at the weekend.
During a casual chat over coffee.
Yes.
Oh, the late night preposition agony. You lay in bed staring at the ceiling thinking, wait, did I say I arrived on the station? Oh no, it's AT the station. My colleagues must think I'm completely incompetent.
And the research highlights that this anxiety goes beyond just grammar checking. It manifests in very strange physical fears.
Physical fears? Like what?
Because your brain is working so incredibly hard to translate and monitor your speech, you suddenly become highly self-conscious of your own physical body.
Oh my gosh.
You start wondering, wait, am I making a weird face right now because I'm concentrating so hard? Am I blinking enough?
Yes. You're trying to conjugate a past perfect verb, and suddenly you are hyper aware of what you're doing with your hands.
What do I do with my hands?
It is so distracting. So if this is the reality of the cognitive load and the fear response, how do we lower this pressure? How do we turn the heat down so we can actually function?
The single biggest realization you can have, and this is something we really need to internalize, is that people are not studying you nearly as closely as you are studying yourself.
That is such an important reminder. Everyone is mostly just thinking about themselves anyway.
They really are. I mean, often native speakers don't even notice the grammatical mistake you made.
Well, really, they just don't hear it.
They filter it out, or even if they do notice it, they parse your meaning perfectly anyway. Communications still happen.
Which is the whole point.
Which is the entire point of language. Furthermore, if you take the time to really listen to fluent native speakers in a casual setting, you'll realize they constantly repair their own sentences live.
Well, people stumble in their native languages constantly.
Right. They start a sentence confidently, realize it's going nowhere, let it die midway, and just say, anyway, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just move on to the next thought. And guess what? The conversation survives.
The relationship survives.
Exactly. The golden rule we need to establish for anyone trying to reach B2 fluency is this.
Okay. Let's hear it.
A simpler, messier version of you is always, always better than a completely silent version of you.
I love that framing. A messy you is better than a silent you.
Yeah.
It makes me think of treating English conversation like a tightrope versus a wide dirt path.
Oh, I like that. Explain that.
Well, when we overthink, we treat speaking like walking a high wire tightrope suspended between two buildings. We believe that one single wrong step, one misplaced preposition, one dropped S on a third-person verb, that one mistake means we fall to our doom and the conversation is permanently ruined.
Which makes every single word feel like a life or death decision. It's exhausting.
Exactly. And the reality is natural conversation is just a wide dirt path in the woods.
Yeah.
You can stumble over a root, you can step sideways, you can even walk backward for a second to correct your direction, and you are still on the path.
You're still going forward.
You are still moving forward toward your destination, which is connection and understanding.
That visualization really highlights the freedom you actually have in a conversation.
It's liberating.
It is. And to help our listeners feel more comfortable staying on that wide path, We need to arm them with the right vocabulary.
Okay, the vocabulary of feelings.
Right. If we can accurately name the specific emotions we are feeling when the cognitive load gets too high, we can manage them better.
Right.
It's about moving from a vague sense of panic to a specific understanding of our mental state.
So let's naturally weave some of these B2 level terms into our discussion, because having the language to describe the language learning process is incredibly empowering.
The first concept that comes up constantly is the tendency to second guess ourselves.
Second guess.
Yeah. To second guess means to start doubting your decisions after you've made them, or to constantly wonder if you should have done something differently.
Like the classic feeling we discussed earlier, I knew exactly what I wanted to say in the meeting, but I kept second guessing my grammar.
It's that internal editor constantly tapping you on the shoulder asking, are you absolutely sure about that verb tense?
Before you even speak.
Exactly. When you're constantly second guessing yourself, you inevitably start to feel self-conscious.
That's a heavy one. Feeling self-conscious is so much more intense than just being nervous.
It is. Being self-conscious means you feel uncomfortable because you are acutely worried about how other people are perceiving you or judging you.
Oh, yeah.
For a language learner, this often looks like feeling intensely self-conscious about your accent, or feeling self-conscious when you have to hear a recording of your own voice in English.
Because you aren't present in the conversation anymore. You are busy watching yourself from the outside, just critiquing your own performance.
You're in the audience of your own life rather than on the stage.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads to a fear of being spontaneous.
Right. Something spontaneous happens naturally in the moment without being carefully planned or scripted in advance.
Which is exactly what that call center strategy is desperately trying to avoid.
Yes.
Speaking spontaneously feels absolutely terrifying when your RAM is already full and you don't have any preparation time to lean on.
It feels incredibly risky. But spontaneity is the lifeblood of real conversation.
It is.
The goal is to make these spontaneous interactions feel more instinctive.
Instinctive.
Yeah. When something is instinctive, it happens naturally as a reflex, without conscious thought taking up your working memory.
So like building muscle memory for small reactions?
Yes, exactly. For example, when you practice small, natural reactions, like saying, oh, really? Or that makes sense, or no way, they eventually become instinctive. You don't have to translate them from your native language in your head. They just come out automatically.
And doing so buys your brain valuable processing time.
It really does, which ultimately helps you become more articulate.
Okay, but let me pause here and ask a question about that word.
Sure.
Articulate. Is being articulate actually the opposite of being spontaneous?
Why do you ask that?
Because to me, spontaneity sounds inherently messy and off the cuff, while being articulate sounds incredibly polished, perfect, and heavily planned. Like a politician reading a highly voted speech.
That is a very common and very harmful misconception, actually.
Really?
Yeah. They are not opposites at all. Being articulate does not mean using the longest, fanciest vocabulary words you can find in a thesaurus. It doesn't mean speaking with zero pauses or absolute grammatical perfection. Being articulate simply means that your core meaning is expressed clearly and understood easily by the other person.
Wow. Okay.
You can be highly spontaneous, change the direction of your sentence midway through, use very simple words, and still be completely articulate because the listener knows exactly what you mean.
That is a massive relief for anyone listening. So articulate equals clear, not flawless.
Correct. And knowing that difference helps you maintain your composure.
Composure.
Composure is the ability to remain calm and in control of your emotions, especially in a difficult, high-pressure situation.
Like keeping your composure when the CEO suddenly turns to you in a crowded room and asks, so what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah.
And your brain just immediately tries to trigger the panic program.
Precisely. Maintaining your composure doesn't mean you immediately possess the perfect B2 level academic answer. It just means you don't let the system crash while you search for the words you do have.
So how do we actually do that in real life?
That's the trick.
Now that we understand the cognitive load and we have the words to describe feeling self-conscious or losing our composure, how do we physically stay in the game? Like when the pressure is on, what do we actually say?
This is where we transition from understanding the theory to taking practical action. Often, when B1 learners hit that mental wall, they rely on very basic, almost defeatist phrases to explain their difficulties.
Give me an example.
Well, upgrading these phrases to a more natural B2 level not only sounds much more authentic to a native speaker, it actually helps you maintain psychological control of the conversation.
So let's run through some scenarios. What's a basic phrase a learner might default to when their brain is overthinking everything?
A learner might just look frustrated and say, I think too much.
Right.
Which is true, but we can elevate that to sound much more natural. Instead of saying, I think too much, you can say, I tend to second guess myself when I speak English.
Oh, that sounds so much more mature. I tend to second guess myself.
It does.
It's highly descriptive, and it immediately communicates to the native speaker exactly what's happening in your internal process, which builds empathy.
Exactly.
What about when someone completely freezes, like the deer in headlights moment?
When the RAM crashes and a learner freezes, they often panic and say something very blunt like, I can't speak, or I don't know English.
Which sounds like an absolute emergency. It just kills the conversation dead.
Right. It forces the other person to comfort you instead of converse with you. Instead, we want to use this highly natural, everyday phrase.
Which is?
I struggle to get the words out.
Oh, I struggle to get the words out. I love that phrase.
It works so well.
It does, because it implies that the idea is definitely in there. Like, you possess the intelligence and the thought, but the physical, mechanical act of producing the language is just hitting a temporary roadblock.
Right.
It buys you so much grace from the person listening.
It frames it as a mechanical issue, not an intelligence issue. Now, what about the scenario you mentioned earlier?
The CEO question.
Yeah. The CEO asks you a direct question, and your mind needs those 3 or 4 seconds to clear the cognitive traffic jam. You don't want to just stare at them in terrified silence.
The silent stare is brutal. You just assume they are judging your competence with every passing second.
To avoid that silence, you calmly buy yourself processing time by saying, give me a second to put that into words.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here and push back on that a bit.
Go for it.
If I'm in a professional environment and my boss asks me a question and I say, give me a second to put that into words, doesn't that make me look unprepared or incompetent? Like, I don't know my job.
It's actually the exact opposite.
Really?
Think about how a senior executive or a thought leader answers a difficult question. They rarely blurt out an immediate panicked response.
That's true.
Taking a beat, acknowledging the question, and taking time to formulate a clear answer actually signals thoughtfulness and high composure. It shows you are in control of the pace of the conversation.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, using the phrase, give me a second to put that into words, it reminds me of a computer's loading or buffering icon.
Oh, tell me more.
Like if you are watching a video online and the screen just completely freezes with no icon, no movement at all, what do you assume? You assume the video player is broken.
Right. You refresh the page.
You get frustrated and you click away.
You assume there's been a critical failure in the system.
But if the video pauses and that little circle icon pops up and starts spinning,
you wait.
You are perfectly happy to sit there and wait. You know the content is coming. It just needs a few seconds to load the data over the network.
That's brilliant.
Using a phrase like, give me a second to put that into words, is your verbal buffering icon. You are explicitly telling the other person, my system isn't broken, the answer is just loading. And human beings are remarkably patient when they see the loading icon.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It manages the listener's expectations perfectly. When you say that, the other person almost always just nods, relaxes their posture, and waits.
Yeah, they don't get mad.
They don't sigh. They don't check their watch, and they certainly don't think you are unintelligent, which is what our fear program tells us they will do.
Okay, so we've got the buffering icon for direct questions, but what about group dynamics?
Those are tricky.
What about when you aren't asked a direct question, but you want to stop being the ghost at the dinner party?
Group dynamics are notoriously tough because learners often wait for a formal, engraved invitation to speak.
Like, please share your thoughts now.
Right. They sit there waiting for someone to turn to them and say, and now we would be honored to hear your perspective on this matter, which in casual daily life literally never happens.
Never. The conversation just moves like a river, and if you don't jump in, it leaves you behind.
So instead of waiting in polite silence, you need to learn to, as the natural phrase goes, jump into the conversation.
Jump in.
You do this by using small, instinctive entry wedges. You don't need a perfectly constructed paragraph prepared. You just use a small phrase to get your foot in the door and claim your turn to speak.
Like what?
Something as simple as, wait, really? That actually happened to me too.
Wait, really? Boom. You are suddenly in the conversation. You might not even know what your second or third sentence is going to be yet, but you've jumped in, you've materialized at the dinner party.
And learning to jump in before you are fully ready takes us to a critical part of this entire process.
Which is?
Well, we've discussed the mindset, the cognitive load, the vocabulary, and the buffering phrases. But how does a learner actually train these skills when they are alone?
Oh, the practice.
Right. How do you build real durable confidence so you are ready to jump in when you are out in the real world?
Yes, because let's be honest, you can't just listen to a podcast, a deep dive about speaking and magically be cured of your anxiety.
No, you can't.
There has to be a physical practice involved.
There does. But before we get to the practice, we need to completely dismantle what psychological research calls the timeline of confidence.
The timeline of confidence. What does that mean in this context?
Most adult learners operate under a pervasive myth. It's the myth of the ready day.
The ready day.
They have this deeply held illusion that if they just study grammar long enough, if they just read enough textbooks, and if they memorize enough vocabulary flashcards, one day they will wake up, look in the mirror, and magically feel 100% confident and completely ready to speak English to native speakers.
The mythical finish line.
Exactly.
Like once I know exactly 5,000 words, I will unlock the confidence achievement and no longer be afraid of meetings.
And that day, sadly, never comes.
It doesn't.
Because the reality of human psychology is that genuine confidence comes after the action, not before it.
Wow. Confidence comes after. Let's linger on that for a second.
You don't feel confident and then decide to speak. You speak while you are terrified, you stumble through it awkwardly, you survive a messy moment, you realize nobody in the room exploded or laughed at you.
Right.
And that survival is where the confidence is generated. Confidence is literally just the memory of surviving the awkwardness.
Confidence is the memory of surviving the awkwardness. That is a paradigm shift.
It changes everything.
So if we know we have to push through the messy, awkward phase to get the confidence, how can we practically practice this when we are alone so that the awkwardness isn't quite so paralyzing when we are finally with others?
The primary goal of solo practice isn't just mental. It is highly physical.
Physical.
Your mouth, your tongue, and your vocal cords physically need to get used to the muscular movements of speaking English sentences quickly. It's exactly like learning to play an instrument or learning the lyrics to a fast song.
How so?
You can listen to your favorite song 100 times on your headphones. You can understand all the lyrics perfectly in your head.
Yeah.
But the moment somebody hands you a microphone at karaoke, if you haven't physically practiced singing those words out loud using your own breath and vocal cords, you will stumble, you will lose the rhythm, and you will feel like you've never heard the song before in your life.
Karaoke humiliation is a universal human experience.
It really is.
It's so true. Your brain knows the data, but your mouth hasn't built the muscle memory to execute the data.
To build that physical muscle memory for English without the pressure of a live audience, the most practical solo strategy is utilizing voice notes.
Okay, let's talk about the mechanics of this. How should someone do it?
It's remarkably simple, but highly effective for building spontaneous speaking skills. Take out your phone, open any basic voice recording app, and record yourself for exactly 1 minute.
Just 1 minute.
Just 60 seconds. Talk about your day, summarize an article you just read, or describe a movie you watched. Just force yourself into spontaneous speaking for 60 seconds without a script. And then you have to listen back to it.
Okay, I am going to stop you right there because I have a visceral reaction to this advice.
Let's hear it.
Recording voice notes and listening back to them is absolute, unadulterated torture.
It is hard.
Everyone on earth hates the sound of their own recorded voice, even in their native language.
Very true.
Doing it in a second language where you know you are actively making mistakes and struggling with your accent, how do we possibly get past the pure cringe of doing that?
Your reaction is exactly why most people avoid this exercise. But pushing past that cringe is where the real growth happens. It is uncomfortable. The first time you hear yourself, your fear program will activate, and you'll think, who is this person? I sound terrible. My accent is so sick.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to acknowledge the cringe, accept that it feels weird, and then push past it because the utility of this exercise for building muscle memory is unmatched. But to make it bearable and actually effective, you must follow the rule of one.
The rule of one, what is that?
When you listen back to that 1 minute recording, your brain's internal editor is going to want to fix 20 things at once.
Because you hear every mistake.
Exactly. You'll think, oh, I messed up that past tense. My TH pronunciation sounded weird there. I paused for way too long. I used the wrong preposition.
Right.
Stop. Trying to fix all of that at once is just another form of overthinking that overloads your cognitive RAM. You must focus on fixing just one single thing for the next recording.
Give me a concrete example of applying the rule of one.
Let's say you listen to your recording and you notice that you have multiple, very long, agonizing silent pauses where you are searching for words.
Okay.
Your only goal for the second recording is to eliminate the dead silence by using filler words like, you don't worry about grammar.
You just fix the silence.
Right. Or maybe you realize you are overusing a specific crutch word. Let's say you say the word basically every 8 seconds.
I do that sometimes.
We all do. Your only goal for the next 60-second recording is do not say the word basically.
That makes the exercise so much more manageable. You aren't demanding absolute perfection from yourself. You are just trying to fix the basically problem.
Exactly.
It turns it into a very focused game rather than a broad judgment of your overall intelligence.
And practicing this focused, forgiving evaluation during solo practice helps train you out of another terrible habit that plagues language learners.
What's that?
The post-conversation replay.
Oh, no. I am intimately familiar with the post-conversation replay.
It happens to everyone. You manage to have a conversation with a native speaker, you survive, you say goodbye, and you walk away.
Right.
And then you spend the next 4 hours obsessively analyzing it in your head. Was my grammar right in that third sentence? Did I use the right tone? Did they notice I paused? Did I sound stupid?
It's the ghost at the dinner party haunting themselves on the ride home.
Exactly. We need to put an end to the replay loop by fundamentally changing our metric of success.
How so?
Right now, for most B1 learners, their internal metric of success is, was my English perfect?
Which is an impossible standard.
We need to completely replace that metric with a new one. Did they understand my meaning?
Wow. Simple as that.
If the answer is yes, if you communicated the idea and they responded appropriately, the conversation was a 100% success. Period. Move on with your day.
I love that.
Speaking a language should give you information and connection, not serve as a tool for self-punishment.
Speaking should give you connection, not punishment. That is the core takeaway.
Okay, we have covered incredible ground today. Let's trace our path. We started with the sheer agony of the silent meeting and the trap of the perfect unspoken sentence.
We dug into the cognitive mechanics of the crowded mind, understanding how our working memory simply crashes when grammar, vocabulary, and fear all try to run at the same time.
We threw out the call center strategy of flow-charting every interaction, accepting that real people are wonderfully chaotic and will inevitably ask, why is that, and just ruin our scripts.
We faced the fear of looking foolish and realized that stumbling down a wide dirt path is infinitely better than falling off the stressful tightrope of perfection.
We armed ourselves with the vocabulary to name our feelings, learning to recognize when we are second-guessing ourselves, feeling self-conscious, or losing our composure. And we learned that being articulate just means being clear, not flawless.
We upgraded our daily phrases, using our verbal buffering icon, give me a second to put that into words, and practicing how to instinctively jump into the current of a conversation. And finally, we committed to pushing through the cringe of voice notes, remembering that confidence isn't a prerequisite for speaking. Confidence only comes after we survive the messy reality of speaking.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up, what is the ultimate philosophy our listeners need to carry with them today?
The overarching philosophy is this. Being a good natural English speaker does not mean you never get stuck. Everyone gets stuck.
Everyone.
Being a good speaker simply means that getting stuck doesn't force you to abandon the conversation. Meaning must always come first. Polish can come later.
That's huge.
Do not sit in silence while you try to craft a masterpiece in your head. Just say the first sentence, however messy or simple it is, and trust that the momentum of the conversation itself will help you find the second sentence.
Jump into the current and let the river help you swim. I absolutely love that.
It takes the pressure off the individual and puts trust in the dynamic of the conversation.
Well, as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave everyone listening with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over during your day.
Ooh, Aria, what?
We've spent this entire time talking about how to manage our deep-seated fear of making mistakes, of sounding messy, or of appearing less than perfect. But I want you to flip that perspective and consider this.
Okay.
What if your small mistakes, your hesitations, and your slight imperfections in English actually make you more endearing and approachable to fluent speakers?
That is a fascinating psychological reframe.
Think about it from the other side. When you meet someone who speaks with textbook flawless, polished, hyper-articulate perfection, someone who never stumbles and never pauses, it can actually be quite intimidating, right?
Puts up a wall.
It feels like you're talking to a corporate press release rather than a human being. But when someone is genuinely trying to communicate, showing a little vulnerability, searching for a word, laughing at a slight stumble, It makes them profoundly human.
It really does.
It strips away the pretense. It makes people instinctively want to help them and connect with them. What if a slightly messy, highly genuine conversation actually makes people feel closer to you than a flawless, perfect performance ever could?
It changes the entire goal of learning a language. It truly becomes about connection over perfection.
Connection over perfection. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. Don't wait for your English to be perfect. Keep listening, keep speaking, and go jump into a wonderfully messy conversation today. See you next time.